Hi everyone, welcome back to the Watch Insider. My name is Brian and thank you all for logging on. I'm joined tonight by Tim Masso.
Hey guys.
And we've got some great watches here for you all to see. So to start things off, Tim, why don't we do a quick wrist check? And while you're doing that and getting that ready, guys, please feel free to ask any questions you may have. That's what this show is all about, showing you guys some great watches from the vault, talking a little bit about what's going on in the industry, as well as answering any questions that you guys have that are relevant to you. So, Tim, why don't you, this is a new piece.
This is an old piece, the oldest. My graduation watch from 2002. This watch is 16 years old now. My old Bond Seamaster, the watch that I've owned from the beginning. It was with me through college, with me through my Navy years, wore it for combat swim, I wore it for my final exams. This is a watch that has been through the mill with me personally, and I even have a scratch on the sapphire that I'm never going to remove right around 4 o'clock, and that scratch came from the day I totally binned my bike while wearing this watch, and the watch actually came off better than I did. I've got a scar on the wrist to match the one on the watch. An old friend.
Great piece, and probably a watch that if any collector was asking necessary watches to have in collection, a Seamaster 300M would probably be one of them.
That design's 25 years old this year.
So tonight I am wearing a Patek Philippe 5980 in stainless steel with a blue dial. The watch is registers minutes, hours. It is the type of chronograph actually where Tim can go a little bit more into the mechanism in which it is not a detriment to the watch in order to continuously run the chronograph.
That's a fact. This was actually the first automatic winding Patek Philippe in-house chronograph caliber when it bowed back in 2006. It was the 30th anniversary of the Nautilus, and the 5980 model that you see here bowed alongside the 5960 annual calendar. So automatic winding vertical clutch column wheel, the thing about this dial is that it's rather static if the chronograph isn't running. There's no constant seconds. So by incorporating a vertical clutch to the chronograph system, you can run the system continuously with no hazard, extra wear, or tear to the movement. So you can have that center constant seconds. Just ignore the mono counter for minutes and hours, and you've got your hours, minutes, and seconds at center with no danger from running the chronograph full time. It's actually a lot better looking inside after Brian's gotten his hands on it. But that's why the laser welder exists.
Yeah, no, I'm never gonna polish this thing.
Just like I'm never gonna replace that crystal. Good stuff.
Awesome. So we've got a really cool selection of watches tonight all across the gamut. I'm going to get us started off with a bang. So this is a FP Journe watch where it's actually the first one that we've ever had. So it was super, super special when we took it in, given that we'd been looking for one for a long time and we, finally were able to bring one in. Hard to really see with the lighting and the color given the dial, but this is a ruthenium resonance. So
do we have that polishing cloth? I feel bad.
I have no idea.
Guys, if you want to make magic happen, if you can find a polishing cloth, I apologize. In the meantime, I'm going to gently rub the crystal with my shirt because I'd rather sacrifice the shirt than the watch and show this one in the best light. So
the Ruthenium Series was launched in 2003, and it was a series of watches that FP Journe did with ruthenium dials and ruthenium coated movements. So what's special about it is that, number one, these are brass movements. They're brass movements in 40mm cases. So this was the first time that FP Journe had done this. The watches were made in a limited edition of 99 pieces each, which were then obviously sold across the world. The resonance over time has become probably synonymous, A, with the brand, and B, are some of the most collectible watches that he's come out with. So that's what I think really makes this watch special is that it's one of the most celebrated limited edition collections that he's ever done. They're pretty much all gone, and it's a watch that is very much unique to the brand.
Yes, and just to quickly go over what's happening here. 2 balances, 2 escapements, 2 drivetrains, and 2 mainspring barrels wound and set from a single crown. It's the actual loss, the parasitic loss of energy that mutually reinforces their precision. So if one speeds up, the other tends to slow it down. If one slows down, the other tends to speed it up. It takes about 10 minutes for the resonance effect, originally developed for clocks, to take a purchase on the balances. That's why there is a resetting system on the dial, so that once the hands are actually moving in sync, if they're not indicating the same time, you can zero the seconds hand and start them off in sync from the beginning, and that's how the system works. These watches were 40 millimeters in platinum, which made them large by early FP Journe standards. And this is actually the Resonance 1 movement architecture. As you can see, a combination of visible ratchet wheels for the mainspring barrels, as well as brass movements. In this case, ruthenium plated rather than rhodium plated. Gorgeous watches, wonderful pieces, and this one actually made in 2001. It has a 2001 stamp on the case back. A couple of interesting things here, as the early Journes up to about mid-2004.
Oh, it was 01 to 04.
Yeah. The early Journes up to about mid-2004 would have a stamp on the case back with the reference of the watch, in this case R, and the number 010203, telling you what year the case was made. You also have double hallmarks for both France and Switzerland, because back in the old days, a company outside of Paris called Eleanor actually built FP Journe's cases for him. So in the early days, both French and Swiss hallmarks, until FP Journe bought Eleanor and moved it to Geneva around 2008.
Answering Mark S. in the chat, why do we talk about FP Journe so much? Because we love them, and this show is about talking about watches that we love.
That's a fact. We like watches that are fun, distinctive, oftentimes innovative and different, and frankly, I've seen a lot of Rolex in my life, and we're going to leave that to the Friday show because they go pretty deep into that. We tend to go into the etceterini, the cool stuff that's a little off the radar. When you said we're going to jump in with a bang, I thought that was your segue to the Hublot.
Ah, that would have been a great segue into the Hublot.
Next time.
Next time. So moving right along, here we have a Tag Heuer Monaco. So this watch was launched in 1997. It is an homage to the original Monaco. The reference number, I can't see it, it's on the case back.
CS2110.
Was done as a limited edition of 5,000 pieces. So here you see tritium accents going around the dial. This watch was the first of, I want to say, 3 or 4 limited editions that Tag Heuer came out with. And Tim was so nice to tell me that this was the first, it was the first launch right after the IPO.
Yeah, this was the first truly special watch that the newly initially public offered Tag Heuer concern, post-Technique d'Avant-Garde, actually launched. So this was a return to their roots in some respects, and you can see that as it was one of the few watches during that era that featured exclusively the Heuer script on the dial. So a 5,000-piece limited edition. It's important for 2 reasons. First, it was a return to the Monaco case. This was the first modern rendition of the Monaco. Also, with the tritium dial, it's a little bit of a throwback in its own right. And it's a 38mm case with a plexiglass crystal, and that's something you simply don't see anymore among the modern Monaco re-editions. So this watch, quite singular, both in its size, its use of an unusual crystal, its place in the Heuer continuity coming just after the IPO, as well as the fact that it is distinctly different from the Monaco re-editions that came after. All of those are trying to be the Steve McQueen. This one's its own thing, and I actually respect that.
Yeah, I picked this watch just because I think that it's relevant today with, you know, the surge that's going on in vintage Tag Heuer. As we've talked about, you know, Rolex and Patek has gotten so expensive that a lot of other brands are starting to come onto the scene for being a little bit more, I guess affordable would be the word. But you've got Universal Geneva, Tag Heuer, Omega, Blancpain, a lot of these brands now, a lot of the vintage pieces are coming on now. And while 90s is not really vintage, I just think that it was a cool retro-inspired watch that's in line with a lot of the watches that I'm really digging right now.
I think it's reasonable to call 90s vintage. If you look at some of the watches that were out during the 90s, the Zenith-powered Daytonas, Tag Heuer from the era with tritium dials, any Panerai made during the 90s, that is vintage in its own right. And I think it's a different class of watch than a 50s or 60s Rolex. But at the same time, it's an opportunity to get into something from a kinder, gentler era when production volumes were generally lower. And a lot of brands were in a kind of transitional, transformative time. There were 3 separate owners of Tag Heuer during the 1990s. If that isn't a transition, I don't know what is.
Well, and you know, a few people in the chat are mentioning that, you know, 5,000 is a lot, but you also have to realize in the scheme of Tag Heuer, 5,000 is really not that many. I mean, you're talking about a brand that has thousands of points of sale across the world. So, and a very large customer base at a price point that, you know, many watch consumers can get into. So 5,000 for a brand like this flies.
And frankly, who cares if there's others? Buy the watch because it's cool, not because
Exactly.
you'll have the only one. You know what? I can afford just about any watch, so if I wanted to copy you, I could copy you. Buy the watch that you enjoy for your own self, because there's always some asshole who's going to ruin it for you if it's just about not seeing the same watch twice. And William Massena, who I consider to be a very accomplished scholar and collector, equally in each measure, once told me that the thing a vintage nerd and snob hates more than anything else is the idea that someone else might come into the room with the same watch. Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy.
Langmac, hey guys, do you like the 15400 in black? I want to buy it as my next watch. I have a Rolex Mariner. You know, I'm a big fan of the Royal Oak line. For me personally, I agree with Ryan, not so much in the proportions, but that the watch is, I think, a little bit big on the wrist and fits a little bit larger than a 41 millimeter case. So, you know, take a look. You can also look at the 15300s that are out there. It's 39 millimeter. It's a little bit more true to size, I think, and they tend to be great watches.
I actually think the 15400 and the 41 millimeter chronographs, the 26320, 26331s, they wear more like offshores now. The bracelets are so solid, the links are so large, the case is so big. Don't think of it as a 41, think of it as almost like a baby offshore. It's going to be flatter than an offshore, but that's about it. Once you put them on the wrist, and I've measured them lug to lug, link to link, they're so big that they're just a world removed from the 39s. I'd even say don't count out the 36s. The 14790 had a long run. You can find anything you want, from a military dial, all Arabic, to tantalum and rose gold, to an annual calendar. They've actually got a 36 millimeter annual calendar Royal Oak midsize from the 90s. Salmon dials, it's all out there. Don't give up on it, because the 41
I'm actually
is not
looking
the
for
end
a
of the
white
world.
gold salmon dial 39 millimeter piece.
That would be a very cool piece. If we find that, that's going to be on the show.
Yeah.
So consider every Royal Oak sub 41, because there's a world out there. The 14802, get one of the Jubilees from the 90s. That would really be the jumbo to own.
Okay, so I'm going to pick another watch. Now here we have, so, you know, have to bring a Patek. So this is a watch that has been around for a long time, but not in this exact configuration. So this is a Patek Philippe 5396 Rose with the blue dial stick markers. And why I brought this watch on the show is because the 5396 has become a core piece of Patek Philippe's annual calendar collection. They've done it both in rose and white gold with a track dial, a stick dial, a Breguet numeral dial, and then the most recent examples being the rose gold with the blue dial with the sticks and the diamond markers. And what surprised me is that I had originally thought that this watch was going to sort of matriculate out into regular production, would be somewhat accessible, and would just be the next iteration of the watch that you could buy. But, you know, as it turned out, Patek really clamped down on production of these pieces, and we've really only seen one or two of each piece new. So it was really special that we were able to get this one pre-owned. It's really the first one that we've even been offered. And I think that if they don't come out with another 5396 and it ends on this note and they transition into a different model, that you're going to see, I think, the values of this particular watch increase.
A gorgeous watch too, very wearable. And if you're like me and you prefer aperture calendars, this will be right up your alley. Blue and rose is a potent combination. I actually give Patek considerable credit for going with a sunburst here, because a sunburst can be difficult to control stylistically. It can often overpower the composition of a watch. Here, it seems more like a perfect complement.
Yeah, so I was really surprised because, you know, when they first came out with the watch, I really thought that they were going to be somewhat accessible. And that's really sort of what makes Patek so special, is that they really have their pulse, you know, on the production, and that they're able to, on a dime, stop and clamp down on the production of a watch, and you really feel a shortage everywhere, you know, worldwide when, you know, when customers are looking for watches and there's just none available anywhere.
It's just objectively a good-looking watch, guys. I mean, you can't go wrong with the darn thing. It's perfectly sized. It'll fit on any wrist, and rose gold can be polarizing, but that combination of rose gold and dial absolutely suits me. I adore that. I think that's a handsome watch that will look just as good as in 50 years, and you can't say that of all watches from this era.
Mike K, do you believe FP Journe will remain hot for years to come, or is it a fad? I don't think the latter, but I wanted to ask. I do believe that it's going to be hot for years to come. I think that this is very much dictated by his production numbers, which he has really no intention to increase. He's only producing anywhere from 650 to around 900 watches per year with no plans to expand. So that's number one. Number two, the brand has really gone from being sort of niche to being a little bit more mainstream. You know, lots of customers who had never heard of the brand before have gotten into it. You've got a lot of first-time customers coming into the brand where traditionally it was probably mostly repeat. People buying their third, fourth, and fifth pieces. Lots of customers are buying their, their first and getting into the brand and, and staying there. And I think that you have a lot of customers from other brands, whether it be Breguet, Vacheron, Patek, Lang, and so on and so forth, that are looking for something new, and it's a great option. And the watches are scarce. They only produce, anywhere from sometimes one watch of a given reference in a year, up to only, 50 to 100 in the CB. So I think that demand is going to continue to increase for the brand, and supply is going to pretty much remain the same. So you have to figure if most of the watches are selling out now, and if demand even increases 10%, in a given year, that's 80 to 100 watches that are going to be needed in the market that aren't going to be available. And I think that you're going to eventually, maybe not overnight, but a few years from now, get to the point from where most of his yearly production is pre-sold before the watches even land.
That's possible. I think you have to look at it on two levels. There's some Journe watches that just repeatedly are available. Some things, Octa Divine, Octa Lune, they don't catch fire. Those watches will always exist in a separate parallel market to stuff that's just crazy, like older watches that are discontinued.
But that's making the assumption that demand stays exactly the same. If demand grew to 2,000-3,000 pieces, and he only still made 600 to 800, you'd have that many more Octa Divine customers coming on board.
I also think that everything's relative. There's going to be a demand for the flagship models, and then there are going to be some models that lag. And there will also be new models that become what the Octa Divine was yesterday. So in other words, there will always be a stepped level of, I think, seniority, prestige, and demand, whereby you should be able to get into today's Octa Divine and whatever tomorrow's equivalent of that is going to be, the watch that for whatever reason is Journe's version of Cellini, the piece that just doesn't catch fire. I also think that while the main Journe brand will always be successful because of a good match between market demand and supply, I'm not sure that the Elegant by FP Journe campaign is going to be entirely successful. The idea of the Elegant quartz watch as a sort of sub-brand with a less constrained production is a good idea.
We'll get an Elegant Perpetual coming up.
Well, I mean, easier to do with a microchip in the watch. I'm not sure that that is going to take and have the legs that FP Journe, the mainstream brand, has, but I do think it's a revenue source. So if it's like Porsche with the Cayenne. If that keeps the 911 in production, I'm happy.
Yeah. Moving right along. So another watch that I'm a big fan of but can't wear, which is always a disappointment. Similar reference to what I brought onto a prior episode. Here we have a 5002 in platinum with a blue dial. So for those that don't know, the 5002 was the original Big Pilot. This one happens to be in platinum with a blue dial, limited edition to, how many pieces was it?
I believe this was a 500-piece edition. It's actually fairly prolific for a platinum edition of a watch that's over 46 millimeters in diameter.
I mean, it is amazing, and it still has the fish crown.
Not only does this have the fish crown, how many ways have watches changed in Schaffhausen? You have the fish crown, and by the way, the crown is absolutely original and gloriously matched to the case. 10.8 millimeters in diameter. It's a sensation in and of itself. But check this out. Check the profile of the case. Individual numbering on a limited edition IWC. You don't see that anymore. Today, they wouldn't bother to individually engrave that. That would say 1 of 500 and be done with it. 500 identical case backs is what you'd get. Now, the dial is sensational. Fortunately, my crew was accommodating and brought me a polishing cloth so I can show you this gloriously blue lacquered oversized pilot's dial. And what I like here is that this is the old 5002 numeral 9, dropped index at 12. You have the semi-railroad style.
This watch needs to come back.
Marche. Yeah, well, it's better than the current watch. It's better than the 5009. I mean, it's objectively better looking in any way. Let's put it on the wrist. Platinum in 46, guys, it's heavy.
Yeah, I mean, this is not only is this a big watch, it is a big and heavy watch. But this to me is one of, You know, if you're looking for an iconic big pilot, this to me is probably the one to own.
I'll also say this, guys, it's wearable. My wrist is 16 centimeters. It's not going to look right on your wrist because that's not the idea. The original that inspired it, the IWC reference 341B was a 55 millimeter watch. And if you're familiar with the Big Pilot Heritage 55, you know how ridiculous that is. This was sized down for human anatomy, designed to be worn over a wrist rather than a bicep in a flight suit. I'll also say the watch does have a wonderful match to its platinum case, which is an enormous platinum clasp. You don't see this sort of thing anymore. The clasp by itself is probably more massive than a Datejust.
I mean, today that would probably, I mean, again, I'm only guessing here, but that clasp today would probably be like a $5,000 to $8,000 deployment buckle.
Oh, I guarantee it. And it's an old style clasp too. It's not like you can just order a new one. This one has the old International Watch Co. script on the inside, the fully polished interior, by the way. A throwback in so many ways. Who would have thought we'd be talking about 2002 as a throwback? And this was, of course, the big, slow-beating 18,000 vibration per hour first generation. So if you want that enormous, slow-chugging pocket watch-style counterweighted seconds hand, this is the model you want.
So I'm getting a lot of chatter in there about, you know, Hublot. So I have to, whip out the one that we brought tonight. So I brought tonight a 41 millimeter. Ooh, there goes my mic.
That's our lab. Don't worry. We have money. We can replace those.
Hublot Black Magic. So I feel like there's a lot of people that are on, either side of the fence when it comes to Hublot, and I have to say that I am actually a very big fan of the brand. I think that they make a very high quality product. They are always ahead of the curve when it comes to the use of materials. And I think that they make a watch that's really nice at a compelling price point that's generally pretty it's relevant in the market. So, when you have a lot of people that compare it to an Audemars or another watch, but the price points are so different. I mean, the price at which you can get into a Hublot Big Bang relative to an offshore, I mean, offshore is going to be almost double the price.
Let's say this were a steel ceramic. Same design, same dimensions, same movement. What does a pre-owned steel ceramic like 301 go for?
Sub 10.
Yeah, so there you go.
So, I mean, and you really, it's hard to compare the two when it comes down to the value perspective. So I've always been a big fan of the brand. I feel like there's always a spot for a Hublot in any collection. And particularly, I'm actually, the 41 millimeter size is really growing on me because I think that they're very wearable and, they fit the wrist like incredibly well. And for me, it fits my wrist better than an offshore diver or an offshore chrono, just given the size.
Let's do a quick wrist shot. Human-sized wrist, 16 centimeters. You guys know me well from the watch reviews. I think it's important to look at Hublot as a sort of hybrid of a luxury watch and a fashion watch. It definitely trades on image. There's nothing horologically significant about this watch other than the fact that it's a lifetime serviceable Swiss mechanical movement. So it's not in any way like a traditional fashion watch, but it definitely trades on its image and its persona. And in a lot of ways, the brand has a little bit of a cult of personality. I feel that with Hublot, as long as you know what you're getting into, you're getting into a watch that favors, I would say, style over substance, but offers enough substance that it will last the life of the owner. That's the way to look at Hublot. Fun for a high price, but not such a high price that you won't get long-wearing durability out of it. The ultimate price to pay for a watch, I think, is the watch that you can't continue to wear, and an Hublot is a luxury product. It's not high horology, it's not Audemars Piguet, at least not in this iteration, but you're getting an honest, solid product, and as long as you know that it's all about the style and less about the movement, full disclosure, this is just a watch for having fun. Nothing wrong with that.
And the Unico, I mean, again, though, the Unico movement happens to be a great movement. And I think that one thing that Hublot does...
Not in this one, but in the Unicos.
Not in this one, but in the Unicos. So, is that they stay relevant. They're always producing watches that are relevant to what's popular in the time. And they generally do it at a price point that is extremely compelling and competitive relative to everybody else. No different than when Richard Mille came out with the Sapphire Crystal watch for like $2 million, and they came out with theirs for $55,000. So, I think that they manufacture incredibly well. You know, I think that they've branded themselves very well. You know, do they probably do too many limited editions? Yes. But that's the nature of the brand. And at the end of the day, if they're producing a limited edition of 20 pieces, there's going to be 20 customers around the world that associate with that product.
I would also say Hublot has done what most brands can't do effectively, which is going up and down market at the same time. They launched the Big Bang in 2005, and it was solidly luxury. It was an expensive watch, priced over $10,000. It was not an entry-level watch in the luxury segment like a Breitling or a Tag. Yeah, but look what they did. They went upscale with the MP pieces, with the Unicos, with the Mecha 10s, with the Sapphire cases, and they also went down market with the Classic Fusion, and they managed to achieve both without overextending themselves or depreciating the brand, and that's really hard to do.
Yeah. So, final watch on the table is a watch that I think Tim's probably been talking about for like the last week nonstop. So
check my Instagram, Tim_Masso.
So it is the Blancpain X Fathom. So this watch is 55 millimeters, and you almost can't even call it a watch. It's a professional instrument.
I would agree with that characterization. It has a flyback 5-minute chronograph built in that I just activated, so you can time your decompression stops. 24 millimeters thick on a, I don't know what to call it, sea monster of a strap, injection molded, made of 14 pieces, including metal fixtures. The strap itself features a buckle that looks like it belongs on Game of Thrones as some kind of weapon, with a double ardion pin and a strap to match. You're absolutely intended to wear this thing over some sort of diving suit, and not necessarily a wetsuit or a dry suit, more like a submersible suit of some kind. If you look at the dial of the watch, it's a classic 50 Fathoms hiding underneath there. A lot of folks have asked me, is there a 50 Fathoms without a date? Your ship has come in, and it's a nuclear missile sub. The watch features 2 separate depth scales on its dial. One is 0 to 15 with a 30 centimeter resolution. The other is actually 0 to 90, and it features a memory function, so you know the deepest part of your dive. Once you're surfacing, you can actually use that for decompression purposes. It features a bezel that is unidirectional rotating, and it has a report like a Browning automatic rifle. Even better, the bezel is sapphire capped like the standard 50 Fathoms. It's a 5-day power reserve automatic winding, 300 meter water resistant. It features a mesh that covers a helium escape valve on the crown side, silicone hairspring, free sprung escapement. You're getting all the toys with this watch. And again, purists, there's no date. The most sensational thing about this watch, you need to check my Instagram, Tim_Masso, for the loom shot of this watch.
Let me get this thing on a wrist.
Everything is loomed.
So, and one of the
everything.
When I first saw this watch, one of the craziest things about it was just how wearable it was, given the it's not called an undercarriage would be on a car. What would the term be for a watch?
For the underside of the watch?
The underside of the watch.
Just the case back profile.
So, is that, it's actually, it's huge on the wrist, but it actually fits comfortably.
It has no lugs. Like, it is a round case. The strap is a fixture that's attached, and there is really no lug structure to which it's attached. It's just bolted to the case. Now, if you want to see what this watch looks like, here's the loom shot on my Instagram page. Literally every part of that dial is loomed. It's ridiculous. No part of this is tritium powered. No part of this is electrically powered. That's just the luminova on the dial. It lit up my entire room. Absolutely ridiculous. You need to check this darn thing because it's probably the most aggressively ambitious concept watch that's ever been brought to life in the dive category. I can't think of another diver that costs $40,000 new and isn't precious metal.
Yeah, I mean, this thing is crazy, but it fits. That's what's insane about it, is that it fits your wrist better than the Big Pilot fits.
Yeah, actually, let's do a side-by-side between those two, because this thing makes the Big Pilot look like a Datejust.
Here, I'll take this off and let
you.
A
lady Datejust. All right, boom, good to go. Well, Brian is decompressing. IWC Big Pilot's watch versus Blancpain. Reference 5018, reference 5002, reference 5018. You could fit this inside this.
Look how small it makes the Big Pilot look.
It makes the Big Pilot look like a small pilot. And you want to know the craziest thing? This is actually the aperture for the mechanical depth gauge. The water flows through the case. It looks like a fallout shelter. You feel like you could crawl inside this thing and survive a nuclear blast. Absolutely over the top. So much So much so that we actually featured it on 2 consecutive shows, on 2 consecutive nights, on 2 separate channels. A watch big enough to fill up a lot of airtime. That's the Blancpain X Fathoms. Came out in 2011, built to order and only to order.
Pilot style 123, I'll give you $20 for it. That's probably the best offer you'll get. I'd take it. Believe it or not, this is a watch probably that'll make it on the website no more than, 1 to 2 weeks. It's a watch that very few come available in the market, and there are customers around the world that are looking for the piece.
Yeah, you're the guy who buys the Hublot Oceanographique 4000, you're into this. You're the guy who buys the PAM 341, you're into this. You got a PAM 300 or a 603, you're into this. There's a market for this sort of thing. It's a hell of a lot easier to sell that than a men's watch with a diamond bezel.
There's a market for people that actually want to use this watch to dive in.
You know what? I would not mind taking that thing swimming because it can measure as little as half a meter. So if you jump in your pool with that thing, you can play with the depth gauge. I mean, it works, and it's got a 5-minute flyback chronograph. You can use that thing for cooking fish tacos on the grill. That's just enough time that you won't burn them up. Kids time out. That's the ultimate watch. You see that watch come out, kids, dad means business.
But I think that is all the watches that we have tonight. Yeah, so... guys, that's all we have for tonight. We thank you for logging on. Please, as always, if you guys have any questions, feel free to email myself or Tim with any questions before the show. If there's any watches that are on the website that you guys would like to see or like us to talk about, I'm happy to bring those in. Just give me a little bit of notice. Again, this is the Watch Insider. My name's Brian. This is Tim. And thank you guys for logging on.